Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, guests, staff. Welcome to the special council meeting of Tuesday, March 19th. I'll call the meeting to order. Ask for a motion, please, for the adoption of the agenda. Councillor O'Reilly and Richardson, all in favor? It's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in anything on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move right into item 5, which is presentations. Our first presentation is our only presentation, Roads 101, Council Orientation. I'll turn it over to Jennifer Stover, our Director of Corporate Services. Welcome.
Thank you. So we have a few presenters today. I am the first of many. I'll be followed by Juan Rojas, who's our Director of Engineering and Corporate Assets, then by Brian Robinson, Director of Public Works, who will talk about the maintenance of our roads, and the presentation will be concluded by our Deputy Mayor. So I'm starting off to talk a little bit about how our roads stand from a finance perspective. So before we get there, just to put some context into the city of Kawartha Lakes, we're the 6th largest municipality in Canada geographically and 2nd largest in Ontario. On a population perspective, though, it's very different. We're 73rd in Canada and 25th in Ontario. And if we look to the city of Toronto as a comparator, Toronto's number 1 population, both Canada and in Ontario, but 33rd in size. So they have the reverse problem that we have. They've got lots of people and not a lot of land. We've got lots of land and not as many people. So we'll talk about what that means to the city. So on assets, we've got $3.2 billion worth of assets, and more than half of those are made up of our roads and related assets. So roads, bridges, sidewalks, all those sorts of things total more than $1.7 billion if we were to replace them today. And our road network is 5,400 lane kilometers of roads, and you'll hear the other directors speak about our roads as being 2,700 kilometers. They're talking about just driving down the center line of those roads. But actual lane kilometers to go both ways is 5,400 lane kilometers. So if you look at driving to Florida, which some may have done for March break, you could actually drive to Florida and back and still not have driven all of the roads within the city of Kawartha Lakes. Similarly, you could drive out to Vancouver, to the east coast of Canada, and partway back and have used up our roads. So let's put that into some context about what that means as far as budget dollars and how we can fund the road projects that we're working on. So if we'd look to the city of Toronto, they have approximately 80 households per lane kilometer of road. They have roughly 3 times as many roads as the city does, but they have 30 times as many households. Coming a little closer to the city of Kawartha Lakes, if we compare it to the city of Peterborough, they have roughly 37 households per lane kilometer of roads. So they have actually similar households to us, but they have 5 times fewer roads than what the city has. And then finally, in the city of Kawartha Lakes, we have roughly 7 households per lane kilometers. So when we're talking about that from a budget perspective and maintaining our roads are our biggest cost in the budget, and we're trying to spread those costs over 7 households on a lane kilometer basis versus the city of Toronto that can spread those costs over 80 households. So it's much bigger context. So our investment of roads, we've got a few years on here, but if you look to the left, you'll see 2010, and 10 years later, on the far right, you'll see 2019. Our investment in capital is the blue bars on the bottom. We've gone from $11.4 million in 2010 to $24 million in 2019. The green on the top is our operating investment in roads. In 2010, it was almost $16 million. And in 2019, we're at almost $27 million. So our investment in roads has gone up almost 90%, or $24 million in a 10-year period. And I think that speaks to this council's commitment to make sure that we're investing in our roads. Similarly, if we think about winter control, that's high on people's minds as we head into the spring and out of the winter season that we've had. The blue bars that you see is what was budgeted in each of the years, again, 2010 being on the far left, 2019 on the far right. And the green is showing what our actual costs have been. And what we thought was interesting is we would have expected the green bar to go up and down because our winters tend to fluctuate, or so we think. But in reality, those winter control costs are just escalating year over year over year. And I believe that the Director of Public Works will speak to a little bit about what's happening with the climate and the impact that that's having on winter events. But essentially, our winter control budget's gone up 50% over 10 years, and actual costs almost 80%. Our tax support to roads, for the residents wanting to know where their tax dollars go, this is looking at both capital and operating costs. Again, roads, we invested almost 50, or just over $50 million in 2019. Here's not all the services the city offers, but the ones that will probably resonate most with our residents. Emergency services, $34 million. Community services and libraries, just over $23 million. Human services at $11 million. And our garbage collection, our waste management at just shy of $7 million. So it's staggering when you look at it relative to other services to see how much we're investing in our roads. So to go back to my comparison with the City of Toronto and City of Peterborough, again, households per lane kilometre of roads in City of Toronto, they have approximately 80. The average residential property taxes in City of Toronto are just over $3,000, and they've allocated roughly 5% of their budget to maintaining their roads. And I looked just before the presentation started, and they filled almost 250,000 potholes in the City of Toronto in 2018. So it's not a City of Kawartha Lakes issue, it's province-wide. Comparatively, in the City of Peterborough, approximately 37 households per lane kilometre. Their taxes are very similar to the City of Toronto's, and they're investing about 20% of their budget to roads. And then finally, looking at Kawartha Lakes, we have that very small number of households per lane kilometre. Our taxes are actually about $300 less per year than our two comparators. And we're investing 35% roughly of our budget into our roads. So in summary, what we found in putting this presentation together is our maintenance costs are going well beyond the rate of inflation. We've seen increased weather-related events that are impacting that budget, both from a maintenance perspective and a construction perspective. And so as we look to update our long-range financial plan, we're going to need to take all of that into account so that we can ensure that we can continue to invest appropriately in our roads going into the future without it being a significant burden. And that concludes my presentation, unless there's questions. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Director Rojas.
You're looking very sharp today, Director. I just want to point that out.
So my presentation is going to be focused on the capital aspect of roads, and Director Robinson will focus on maintenance. So just from an organizational chart, so you have this in your budget book, and a lot of the information in here is in your capital budget book, both capital and operating. So this is our structure in engineering and corporate assets. We have 4 divisions plus the airport. 2 of them, the ones in blue, mainly deal with the lion's share of capital roads. So we have the next slide. So we have infrastructure design and construction with 1 supervisor, 3 engineering techs, 3 senior engineering techs, 1 seasonal, and that's for our resurfacing. He works a 6-month period, and then 2 students that help out. On the other side, we have technical services, 1 supervisor, 2 engineering techs, 2 senior engineering techs, municipal drains, which are related to the roads, 1 seasonal, again, they do the overlay for the rural resurfacing, and 3 students. The other two divisions funnel into the capital roads project in various different ways. So development engineering oversees private development, both private development and subdivision development. So through the course of time, when that subdivision development is assumed, we essentially inherit those roads. So any large subdivision, the roads, once they're inspected, we assume them and they become part of our database, our asset management base, and then they go into their life cycle of reconstruction and maintenance. Corporate assets is responsible for the life cycle analysis and the funding, or the funding strategy of the roads. So everything is sort of intertwined with each other. So here's our council-approved 2019 capital roads program. And I broke them up. These are not all of them, but it is the lion's share. So in infrastructure design and construction, the manager is Corby Purdy. These are the four major road categories. So bridge, urban rural reconstruction, urban arterial resurfacing, and sidewalks. And I'll touch a little more, I'll get into a little bit more detail into them as we get further along in the presentation. Technical services is headed by Mike Farquhar. Again, he has culverts, rural resurfacing, gravel resurfacing, life cycle management, which I'll expand on later, and gravel rehab. So just a little note there that gravel rehab is a temporary 3-year program that was approved last year by council. We're in year 2 of 3 in 2019. So when I add up all these numbers, it's just under 24 million, which represents about just under 50% of the 51 or 52 million that Jennifer presented before for our roads-related tax-supported budget. So different types of roads. So this is our typical urban road standard. So what our urban road means is it has curb and gutters on both sides, here and here, with a sidewalk on one side, fully serviced, and an asphalt surface, and a street light. So here's a nice example, a nice wide boulevard for snow storage. The property line is somewhere over here. The sidewalk is really close to the property line, and a hydrant and a grass boulevard. So this is a typical, ideal urban road standard. No ditches, fully accessible, nice and wide, so you can have on-street parking and snow storage in the boulevard. Wherever possible, on any new subdivisions, this is what our goal is for an urban cross-section. So rural road surfaces. There's 3 different types, but they all share the same characteristics. There's a granular base and ditches on both sides. The ditches are low enough so that the granular base can drain out to the ditches and the water gets away. And again, this is an ideal situation. Some roads have street lights, some don't. That just depends on where they're located. And then the utilities are usually buried or overhead. You can see a light here, and the utilities are buried. You can see nice ditches here and culverts underneath the driveways. This is an asphalt surface. We also have a high float surface. Again, ditches on both sides with hydro overhead, and then a gravel surface. Ditches on both sides with a nice wide platform. So those are essentially the 3 different types of rural cross-sections, 2 different types of roads. So then we move on to classification. So how do we classify our roads? So this is, and Director Robinson will expand on this because it's also related to maintenance, but just strictly from a classification point of view, there's 2 driving factors that we classify all our roads. One is speed, and one is AEDT. So AEDT is just your annual average daily traffic. It's the total volume of vehicular traffic on the road divided by 365 days. Straight calculation. We do traffic counts every year to maintain our database, and the rest we do estimates. And then I'll get onto this a little bit later, but every 4 years we do a roads need study, and then we update the majority of our traffic counts. So there is a bit of a 4 to 5 year lag, but we troubleshoot the ones that we know. And then we apply a growth factor. So that's how we come up with the ADT, and then speed. So depending on what the speed is, it triggers a category 1, category 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So just an important note, if you look at this column, 6,000 to 7,000 in this example, and you go across, you could see for the same 6,000 to 8,000, or 6,000 to 7,999 ADT, that volume of traffic could be a category 1, category 2, category 3, or category 4 road, depending on the volume, on the speed. So for example, we have no 80-kilometer roads, so we have, 90-kilometer roads. So most of our roads are either 80 to 71 or 51 to 60, this range here. So if we take an 80-kilometer road with the same volume, and we reduce that speed from 80 kilometers to 50 kilometers, it drops the category of road from 2 to 3. And that has certain implications, which we'll get into a little bit later. But there is a correlation between speed and ADT. So here's a chart. Here's a summary of the 2,700 kilometers of centerline roads, and this is how they break down. So we have no category 1s. An example of category 1 would be the 401, because we have no roads with that high speed or that high volume. Our biggest one is CKL 36. We have is an example of a category 2. And then here's are just examples of the various categories. Most of our roads are classified as collector roads, either category 3 or category 4. So almost 1,400 are category 4. So this is from our roads need study. So I apologize. It's every 5 years we do our roads need study. So every 5 years we hire an independent consultant to ride all our roads and rate them in accordance with the minimum maintenance standards and our standard rating system. So it breaks down as follows. We basically have a third, roughly. Roughly 900 in each category for hot mix, surface treatment, and gravel. And this forms the basis of our long-term plan. So we categorize the roads, we rate them, and then we prioritize them based on both volume and road classification. So the higher volume, higher road classification gets priority for dollars. So that's our strategy moving forward. Or it's been our strategy for the last 10 years. So the asset management plan was completed in 2016 and incorporated in, the roads need study was done in 2016 and then incorporated into our asset management plan in 2017. So during that presentation, there was a strategy of a life cycle extension. How do we keep our good roads good? And there's different strategies for that. So one is you want to focus on your now needs or your poor roads now. Invest in that. But also preventative maintenance or preventative capital dollars, where if you hit the road prior to it hitting a threshold, you extend the life of it. And that's what this chart tells you. So for gravel roads, it's a wash, because gravel roads, you regrade it. Most of our gravel roads, and I have another slide on this, are on a 10-year life cycle. So every 10 years, we add fresh gravel, a couple inches of gravel to the surface. So that's once every 10 years. There are a few of them, the higher volume gravel roads, that are on a 5 to 7 year life cycle, but the majority are 10 years. High float roads, if we did no preventive maintenance, we would get 12 years. By adding some preventative maintenance, we extend that life to 15. And this 12 is a little bit generous. It's usually between 10 to 12 years, where you see your biggest return is in your asphalt. With no preventative maintenance, you get 20 years before you have to touch that asphalt road. with a little bit of preventative maintenance that you extend that to 30 years. So here is our asset management plan, the value of our road assets for the various different categories. So we're excluding some lesser categories like streetlights, signals, and parking lots because we wanted to focus more on the roads category. And you can see the value is the 1.75 billion that Jennifer identified in her slide. So that was the value in 2016, and we just indexed it at a 2% inflationary rate, and that's how you get the 1.75. So if we were to replace all our roads today from scratch, it would cost $1.75 billion. This is just, again, a visual or a graphical breakdown of the previous slides with the different categories within the road. So the road base, whether it's gravel, high flow, asphalt, is all the same. That's the makeup of the base, the granular A and the granular B, which is here. Then you could break up the gravel surface is 0.86, the high float surface is 5.45, and the asphalt is 2.35 of the $1.75 billion. So the asset management plan was incorporated in 2017. It was 2017 to 2027. It's a 10-year plan. It's a dynamic plan. It gets updated as we go. The strategy is to become sustainable. And we've adopted a 4-year phase-in. So we know we can't spend the amount of money that's required to maintain our assets today, but council's strategy was to phase it in over 4 years so that in year 5, it's just cost of living increase or inflationary increase, and it's sustainable. And we're going to update the long-term financial plan this year. So the next slide is a graphical representation of that. So the long orange dashed line is our average need as identified by our asset management plan. The line below it is what we're spending. So the dotted line was our strategy. And you see there's a spike in 2017, 18 and 19. That represents the 3 year, so it's 1, 2, 3 year spike. That represents our gravel rehab program. That was an add-on to the strategy in order to fix our gravel bases, which we're in the middle of right now.
Director, I've just got a question. So before you get too far into it, if we can. Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could have waited. I was just curious, when you were talking about the rural roads and ditches, we know that sometimes, and I mean, the last week has been particularly bad with calls about flooding, that property owners sometimes, for aesthetic reasons, bring their property up to the road level and get rid of the ditches. Mm-hmm. Is there anything we can do about that? Is there any strategy? Because we know when that happens, there's no place for the water to go except on the road, and it eats up the road, and it causes flooding for other people. So is there anything we can do to mitigate against that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So it's really, there's two issues there. One is an encroachment issue. They are illegally encroaching onto city-owned land and modifying the grade. So it could be an enforcement issue. The other issue is a maintenance issue. And Director Robinson will get into this a little bit later, but Public Works maintains those ditches. And they're on a cycle as well. So when they maintain, and some of them really spend a lot of money on beautifying their front lawn. They put Riverstone, they put little garden features in there, which sort of takes away from the functionality of the road. So it prevents, again, the ditches have a purpose. They're there to drain the subbase. And filling that in has consequences for maintenance and for the life cycle of the road. You saturate your base, the water doesn't get away. So it's a matter of enforcement. or maintenance. I've been told that the biggest concern I get from residents once we clean out the ditch, and some of these ditches have been cleaned out for decades. So when you clean out the ditches, the residents don't particularly like it because they can't mow their lawn. It's too steep. Even though it's shown here as a 3-to-1 slope, which is a fairly steep slope, and it's not in our property, is totally legitimate. So it's more of an educational process, maybe an enforcement process. And again, we have to sort of grandfather it in because some of these people have spent a lot of money, they've piped it in. So the debate is, what do you do with them, right? It's a huge expense for the city to rip it out, and you're just going to get them upset. So there has to be some kind of strategy to resolve that. So the next few slides are going to be on 4 programs within engineering for capital. So life cycle management, and I believe you have a copy of all the roads that we're proposing to do in 2019. The one program that we don't list roads is life cycle management. We have just over $1 million, $1.4 million, I think, for life cycle management. And we purposely don't identify the roads at budget time because it's really dependent on the severity of the winter in coordination with Public Works. So these are not large sections of roads. These are, again, crack sealing, single surface treatment, surly seal, micro-surfacing overlays, and drainage improvements. But it's not a full overlay or a full reconstruction of the road. It's troubled areas that have experienced a lot of wear and tear over the winter, and they're isolated, or they're isolated sections that we could get into and repair them. The strategy for life cycle maintenance is to keep our good roads good. So we want to hit them, the majority of the money of the 1.4 million, $1 million is going to be on keeping the good roads good, and 400,000 is going to be on troubled areas. So the next slide shows you a typical life cycle of any road. So you have time and you have status on the one side. Time is here, and the time varies if it's a gravel, asphalt, high float, anywhere between 10 to 20 years. But the curve is the same. So you reach a point here. So for asphalt, it's around year 10, say, where if you let it go, the road falls apart real quickly. So this is a graph that we've seen over and over again. It's sort of industry standards. What it's telling you is that if you spend $1 here for rehabbing the road before it gets to disrepair here, you're saving 80 to 75% of the cost. $1 here to do the same work here would cost you $4 to $5. So that's our strategy of keeping the good roads good. You don't want to, once you get past this line, this is fair. Once you get past that point in the graph, it becomes poor, very poor, serious, and failed. So you don't want to be doing work in this area. The balancing act is we can't afford to do all our roads today. So we have to prioritize them and we have to stage it. So that's why we have a 4-year staging plan to gradually bring our tax base up to that sustainable level. So then the next program is urban rural reconstruction. This is a full reconstruction of the roads. We rip out the road, replace the granular base, replace the underground surfacing if required, brand new sidewalk, brand new asphalt. It's the most intrusive to the residents because you have a big ditch or excavation across the road. It's the longest, but it refreshes your asset. So Glenelg in Lindsay, Bob Cajun, we're doing Witchwood. Fenland, we're doing Witchwood. Bob Cajun, we did Bolton, Front, Main Street. So there are several examples of these types of roads. And they're all listed in your book for under urban rural reconstruction program, the roads we're doing in 2019. So then we get to the resurfacing program. So the resurfacing we broke up into urban arterial resurfacing. These are the higher volume roads that we go through. Some of them through town have a gutter, some of them don't. That's why it's urban and arterial. It's a combination of both, but essentially they all get asphalt. And there's a list of roads every year. This tender just closed about 2 weeks ago. And it's a duration from when the asphalt plant's open in May to November is the scope of the road. And we just overlay the road. We pulverize and overlay the road. The next one is the rural resurfacing, similar to the urban arterial resurfacing, but the majority of this is high float instead of asphalt. There are some asphalt sections, but again, high float is the majority of the money. We add granular base, and then we slurry seal and high float the driving layer, along with ditch maintenance and then whatever culverts need to be replaced. These are all rural roads, all over the country, fully rural cross sections. And the gravel resurfacing program. So right now, our threshold, and we might talk about this later on, our threshold for when is it a gravel road, when is it a hardtop road. So a hardtop road is high float or asphalt. So the threshold we have is 400 AEDT is the threshold. So this is what we plan to spend over the next 10 years in funding. So there's a dollar amounts, there's a tonnage in our gravel resurfacing, not our gravel rehab. Our gravel rehab is the base, the ditching and the culverts. Our gravel resurfacing is the driving layer of gravel, limestone screenings over top of the gravel road that gets regraded, that people drive on. So if you could see, the majority of our gravel roads fall well below 200 AEDT. So those roads, we have a 10-year life cycle. And then we recognize there are some roads that are slightly higher traffic. So 200 to 300, we put them on a 7-year life cycle, and then 300 to 400, we put them on a 5-year life cycle. There are a very small few percentage of roads that are over 400. So these are not actuals or estimates. So what we did is we took the actuals from 2016 and then we indexed them by the growth by 1.5% or whatever the growth was, and they slightly exceed 400. I think one's at 435 and the other one's at 415. So they're right on the threshold. So for those roads, we would evaluate them if there's a long enough stretch and if the condition warrants, we would then convert those over to a hardtop road. So just in case someone's curious, the 1.8 kilometers of gravel roads that are over 400 are the Manver-Scugog Town Line Boundary Road, sections of that, and Stony Creek Road. So those are the two roads combined, sections of it that are over 400. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the municipal Class EA process. So this is a very prescribed process. You really need about a day and a half to fully understand the municipal Class EA process. There are courses out there that offer that service. I've sent staff to go. I think people in Public Works have gone. But I'll try to summarize it in 4 slides, at least the highlights of them. So let me back up. So there is the EA, Environmental Assessment Act. That's a provincial act. Within the EA Act, there are several subcategories. One is for municipalities to do their work. But it prescribes sort of any type of road project. So the EA Act says you have to do these processes. And they're all unique. So what they did is they lumped projects together and they said, okay, the municipalities, we don't want you to start from scratch because all roads sort of are the same. The way you plan them, the way you consult, the way you build them have similarities to them. So they created a category called municipal class EA that deals with roads, water, wastewater, transit, all those different subcategories. So this is the chart, and this is just for information. This is sort of, in a nutshell, the flow chart of the municipal EA process. And what's important to know is just the categories. You don't need to know that you probably can't read the details, but there's a phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's important to know. Phase 1 essentially is the identification of the problem, the issue. And phase 5 is implementation. So phase 5 is the construction. And everything in between is the decision-making process, how it affects the environment, the social culture, how you consult. That's basically phase 2, 3, and 4. But the important thing is identification, number 1, and the implementation, number 5. So then they're broken up into different types of projects, A plus, B, and C. And depending on whether you're an A, a B, a C, it means you have to do phase 1, phase 1, 2, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, or just phase 1 and then go right to 5. So it sort of dictates what phases you have to do. So then the next question is, well, how do you identify whether it's an A, B, or C? So projects that are A have minimal environmental impact. They're typically maintenance-related projects. So when you sweep the road, that's a project. When you clear out a ditch or you fix a pothole, those are projects. They're pre-approved. The ministry has said they're an A, they're standard maintenance. You don't have to give notice. You can go straight to implementation. So everything's pre-approved, just get it done. Schedule A has a low impact. So a lot of the Schedule A projects are road reconstruction where we're not widening the road, we're not adding lanes. We have to be under a certain threshold, which I think is $2.4 million. But it says you have to give some kind of notice. So most of our reconstruction jobs are Schedule A's. We go above and beyond. We give notice and hold public meetings, which we don't have to do for a Schedule A. But we do it on all road projects. And then we go to construction. So we always give notice at the time of design and about 2 to 4 weeks prior to construction, we'll give notice again. So then Schedule B projects. Schedule B projects now have to do, so for Schedule A plus, we have to do phase 1, which is notify, and then phase 5, implement, go to construction. For Schedule B, you have to do phase 1, which is notify, phase 2, which is consult, and then you go straight to phase 5 to implement. So the other half of our projects are Schedule B, where we're not widening the road, so there's no major expansion, but the dollar trigger is high enough that it warrants consultation. Improving pedestrian access, improving churning movements would be considered a Schedule B. For Schedule Bs, we again go above and beyond. We do a presentation to council with the preferred solution. We have to look at alternatives. Do nothing is an alternative we have to look at. Once that evaluation is complete, we'll come to council to present our findings. We will get a resolution from council endorsing one of the solutions, and then we implement based on council's direction. This also is made, the final decision and the project file is filed with the Ministry of Environment and is open for a 30-day public appeal period. Because Schedule B, there are options that are weighted. And you know, some people have thoughts on which options should go forward. That's why there's an appeal mechanism. Schedule C, we don't have a lot of these. These are more generally for water wastewater projects, so the expansion of the water pollution control plant in Lindsay. The Northwest Trunk was a Schedule C, where you have to do options, and then you would have to do phase 4 is environmental impacts. So you have to look at, because it's an expansion of a facility, and usually you expand in a green field or in an area that's undisturbed, you have to do more review or analysis of the financial impact, especially when you're tunneling under the river like we do with the Northwest Trunk, or expanding lanes. So if you go from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road, you're acquiring property, you're working in the natural environment, so it triggers a Schedule C. Again, we still have to come to council. Instead of a project file, we have to do a formal environmental study report, and then it's filed with the ministry for 30 days to give the public an opportunity for appeal. So there is, I lost it. Okay, it goes away. So there's a little cheat sheet on the municipal class environmental book that basically tells you if it's a category, if it's an A, B, or C, or A plus, B, or C, and you just follow that process. And that's how we determine it. So again, this deals with capital, but it also deals with development. So when a developer does a plan of subdivision, the EA Act says if they follow the Planning Act, and that logical step, that planning process, then they're exempt from the EA. They've essentially done the EA. By following a draft plan of subdivision, going through that public consultation, they've done all the elements of the EA, so we're not going to make them do an EA again. They're very good on not recognizing other processes and saying that's to our satisfactory, you're good to go. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you. So I have a quick question. So what classification of EA would, for instance, the downtown Lindsay rebuilding of the main street, what would that fall under? Maybe you can just take a second and walk us through what process has taken place there as part of the EA.
So all corridor studies, we did 3 corridor studies from 2014 to 2016. So the corridor study looks at traffic holistically. So the corridor, which is part of the EA process. So it would have been a category B corridor study. So we did 3. We did 2 in Lindsay, so Kent Street and Colburn Street in Lindsay, and then the corridor for 121 Coburg, Lindsay Street in Fenelon Falls. So those are the 3 corridors we did. So recognizing that those corridors are large, we did a corridor study for the entire thing, which would have been a category B, and then through the council resolution, we sectioned off, we phased that corridor, because we're not doing, the Kent Street was from Lindsay Street right to Highway 35. That was the whole entire corridor. Within that recommendation, and same with Fenton Falls, we did the whole stretch. Within that, we phased it out into about 6 to a dozen sections or projects that were classified short, medium, and long. And we said, this is what we recommend. Over the course of time, we're going to hit all these projects. And then once the corridor study is done, which is a category B, we then go to implementation. But we still treat it as a special A+. We don't have to, but we do. For example, for Kent Street, we held 2 stakeholders meetings and 2 agency meetings during the corridor study that looked at everything. And then when we're into the detailed design, we held 2 public meetings and several stakeholder meetings, because we knew it was a high-profile project. And then we'll hold more meetings prior to construction starting. So again, everything we do is above and beyond the minimum prescribed in the EA.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to materials that we use, and particularly high float, with changing weather patterns, we've seen, I think, the last 3 years, certainly in my recollection, many more freezes and thaws during the winter time, which I believe adversely affects the road base. Are we at a stage where we should consider not using high float anymore, or constructing our roads in a different way that they stand up better to those kinds of conditions?
So I'm going to answer it in two parts. So one is the asphalt. So there's a threshold where you go above, I think it's County Road 8. So above County Road 8, there was a different recipe for the asphalt. So you could play with there's tons of different types of asphalt product, right? To the layperson, you see asphalt and you think it all looks the same. But the recipe, the flexibility of it changes. So this is the first year. So prior to this year, our cutoff was basically County Road 8. So north of County Road 8, there was a different recipe than south of County Road 8. You wouldn't be able to tell if you rode the roads. But the difference in the recipe is the flexibility of that asphalt, the give, right? We've now, because we're seeing warmer winters, more freeze-thaw, we've redrawn that boundary line to MTO Highway 7. So we've dropped it down to account for that temperature variance, right? So we can play, for the asphalt, it's a little bit simpler because we can play with the flexibility. For the rural standard, it's difficult, and that's the high float or the gravel. You really need free-flowing ditches, and the ditches have to be ideally half a meter below the road base. So the road base is about, again, it fluctuates, but a good road base is about 400 to 450 millimeters of base granular, 150 millimeters of granular A or upper granular, and then a wearing course, whether it be asphalt or high float, whatever it is. So the makeup of your road is around 2 feet, right? 2 to 2.5 feet. And then your ditch should be at least 1.5 feet below that. So your ditch should really be, from the surface of the road to the bottom of the road, your ditch should be at least 1 meter, if not more, in order to get proper drainage from the granular base so it doesn't heave. And I think Director Robinson will talk more about that because that's really what forms potholes. And I've cherry-picked these pictures because they show nice ditches. But if you drive around our urban areas, our rural areas, maybe at one time you had good ditches, but they just filled up over time, or it was a forced road that eventually the municipality or the county or the townships just assumed, because it used to be an old logging road, a farm road, or whatever it is, and we just took it over without really redoing the base or redoing the ditches. So I think a way of mitigating the freeze-thaw cycle is to have drainage. Everything comes down to drainage.
Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Thank you, Duwan. There's a number of roads, obviously, that gravel don't meet the high flow threshold. Do you think going forward, or there's some history of the past, do you think there will be an opportunity of citizens that live on certain roads, we'll say 5 or 10 kilometer roads, if they wish to contribute to a section of road that's going to take it from gravel to asphalt, that perhaps would be a solution or an opportunity in the future? Or do you have any history that, I know that some of the townships did it, but I don't know what our practice is.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so there was an example a couple years ago. I think the residents of Kegawan came forward, and they didn't meet the threshold. They were in this category, 0 to 200. They were well below 200. They were on I think they barely broke 100. But it was an urban area that's never going to meet the 400 threshold. There is a process for a local improvement charge. that they can come in, there's a process that goes through, and if there's enough, if they meet the thresholds within that prescribed process, they can ask to hardtop their roads. I believe in the Kegawan example, the council today said they would fund 50% of the cost if the residents could come up with the other 50% and meet the thresholds in the local improvement criteria.
So that's an option that citizens can still pursue.
I believe
Through
that,
local improvement, or, yeah.
correct. I believe that's an option that anyone can pursue if they know that process.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you for your presentation. This is Director Brian Robinson, for those of you who don't know him, Public Works.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, Council, and guests. Just want to walk through Public Works Roads operations. So 2016, our division was modified a little bit when the Engineering and Corporate Assets Departments was created. Engineering focuses, as Director Rojas talked about, on capital, life cycle extension, and larger programs. We've been moved into more of a operations focused department, delivering day-to-day needs of the residents. So I'm going to walk through our group here. So who we are, we've departmentally we're about 180, roads we're less. We have 3 area managers, 9 supervisors. A couple years ago, we did a bit of a restructuring within our group and created 12 roads crew leaders. Through the summer, those crew leaders are going to be leading projects, replacing culverts, just generally doing crew lead type responsibilities. In the winter, those positions change over into our winter patrol, which is a legislated requirement under the minimum maintenance standards, and I'll talk more about that as we go forward. So those 12 positions are permanently moved into winter patrol through that season. We have 3 positions for road patrol, which is a routine road patrol, also a requirement under minimum maintenance standards for review and observation documentation of our road conditions. We have 18 heavy equipment operators. The heavies really are the piece that for graders and backhoes. Those are the 2 primary pieces of equipment for heavy equipment operators. We have 48 equipment operators. Combined, those 66 staff are the staff that run our winter plows in the winter. And in the summer, again, are focusing on day-to-day operations we'll get more into later. We have 2 damage prevention technicians. Those are the staff that run our locate program. Also a legislative requirement for locates. The city has chosen to provide that service internally. We have 1 utility operator who handles all of the street lights, traffic lights for the municipality. We have 1 senior engineering technician that supports the roads operations group, and I'll explain more about what that role does a little bit later on. We have 6 seasonal sidewalk laborers. Those are supports that come in and run our sidewalk plows to maintain our sidewalks in the winter. Those are just seasonal positions. A lot of the time we're looking to groom those types of positions into replacement equipment operators as the need arises. And then we have a number of summer students that come in and take care. The major need for the summer students is because we typically don't have any vacancy or vacation approved through the winter months for our heavy equipment operators, and roads crew leads. So there's a heavy demand for vacation in the summer on those individuals. Indirectly, we have 5 administrative assistants within roads operations specific. And as council's aware, more recently, we've added 2 service information specialists that I'll explain a little bit more as we go forward. Those are customer service specialist staff for roads. Depots and locations. So we have currently Manvers, Emily, Bobcaygeon, Brent River, Sturgeon Point, and Ops on the east area. We have Oakwood, Fenland, Eldon, Coboconk, Lindsay, Carden on the west. As council's aware, we've recently completed a roads operations depot master plan. That's kind of a foreshadowing for the next 20 years of where our operations department divisions are going to go. Eventually, we're going to consolidate to 3 primary depots and have 8 depots in total for the operating areas. Some of those facilities right now, there's 9 primary ones with where the 9 operators work out of. The 3 there, Sturgeon Point, Ops, and Carden, are either satellite and or winter-only operations facilities at this time. So what we do, again, operationally based department, we have roads, bridges, building maintenance is our roads and bridges is primarily our business. We maintain our own buildings as well. We have winter control, traffic streetlight maintenance, citywide operational programs, which I'll explain a little bit later. Utility locates, again, that's the requirement under the Ontario Underground Infrastructure Notification Systems Act, and the reason why those positions were created for locates. Again, we have our own customer service support staff, and a big piece of what we do, believe it or not, is unplanned work response to emergencies like the flooding we had recently, illegal dumping, and other activities that happen around the municipality. I'm going to touch a little bit on several areas, and I'll probably stop between so that we can have an opportunity to ask questions if there are any. First of all, I want to talk a bit about minimum maintenance standards. Everybody hears what me talk and staff talk about MMS and minimum maintenance standards, and what are they? What do they do? So they are really our guiding principles for winter operations. It's an act, a regulation. It's effectively Ontario Regulation 23902. It's been in place since 2002 and has received several amendments throughout, most recently last year. They're really developed to provide municipalities the defense against liability claims. So if municipalities are able to achieve the requirements under minimum maintenance standards and document that we're providing that level of service, our obligations to the public have been met. And there's a lot of give and take in that statement, but that's really where we provide our level of service in accordance with those minimum maintenance standards. Regulation 239 came into force November 2002, as I mentioned. It's been updated in 2018. The regulation is a living document, and I can talk a little bit more about some of the changes that are happening to that document now. So they are based on the classification of highway. Director Rojas talked about road classifications anywhere from 1 to 6 identified. I want to be very clear that we have no Class 1 roads. We have very few Class 2 roads. The bulk of our roads filter between 3, 4, and 5. We have many Class 6 roads. The regulation for minimum maintenance standards does not apply to a Class 6 road. So those roads are intentionally left out of the regulation. Doesn't mean we have no obligations to provide service. It's just that the obligations as defined in minimum maintenance standards don't apply to Class 6 roads. The minimum maintenance standards are established for road patrol, again, winter and summer patrol, and that's why we've structured the organizational structure the way we have. Winter operations, potholes on paved roads and non-paved roads, and I'll talk more about potholes separately in a little bit. Again, shoulder drop-offs, regulatory and warning signs that are also requirements under the Act to make sure that we are managing them in a responsible manner. Okay, moving forward. Oh, are there any questions before I move forward, or we good? All right. So roads core service review. This is a process that was started in 2015. The initial review, as directed by the prior council, was to look at our limited service agreements. A limited service agreement was a program that was put in place. It's a legal document to agree to provide service to unassumed and private roads. That review is ongoing. So through that review, I'll talk more about where we're at in a couple of minutes, but effectively that process has blossomed over the past couple of years into expansion to a review of effectively our roads inventory to evaluate where we're at, what services we're providing, and what potential implications there are of decisions that we make to provide service or not provide service to those roads. I'll get a little bit more about that as we move forward here. We've had many public meetings with residents, with associations, with groups to talk about that. We've had numerous reports to council. There's been some decisions made, some decisions have been put on hold, and I can explain that as we move forward here as well. Project is ongoing and will remain ongoing for likely several years to come. Out of that review, just want to provide a bit of a high level, an assumed road, a municipally assumed road can have happened in two different ways. One of them, it can be either assumed by bylaw, so staff bring a recommendation report to council, recommend assumption of the road by bylaw. That bylaw is passed and the municipalities assume the road. Prior to 2003, however, a municipality that provided full municipal road service, that's all aspects of ditching, brushing, drainage, winter control, summer maintenance, everything on a road could be deemed assumed by service. There's a variety of caveats in there, but that's the general two ways where a road can be assumed by municipality. All assumed roads, the city is required to provide full, complete municipal service as defined under the Municipal Act. Services include but are not limited to winter control, road drainage, as I mentioned. And most critically, those roads are all contained, or should be all contained within Director Rojas's budget for capital. So we're responsible for full rehab, reconditioning, reconstruction of those roads.
Are you going to go back in a little more detail on that last slide later on, or?
About the unassumed? Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to go through every one of them. Just let me get through about 4 or 5 more slides.
Yeah.
And then the core service rule will be talked, and then we can talk more about that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So moving forward from the assumed roads is to unassumed and private roads. I'm going to have a few slides here to talk about this. The first one here is really just definitions. So an unassumed road is right-of-way property that's owned by the municipality where the city is not really legally required to provide maintenance. So it's an open road allowance. It's never been assumed through bylaw. It's never been assumed by complete and full service prior to 2003. So it's an unassumed road. The city, so I move forward, then the private road is a similar situation, but the road is privately owned. The municipality does not own the property. So we have no ownership and no responsibility related to that road. Council's been provided several pieces of information from legal counsel in the past. This is one quote that came from an external legal counsel. The city is not legally obligated to provide maintenance on either category of road, private or unassumed, and not doing so limits both maintenance costs and exposure to liability of the city. So that's something that, again, just want to reinforce with council that there are no legal obligations or requirements to provide that. There's always the rationale why we should, but that's the legal interpretation. So moving forward again, the status of unassumed roads. Core service review, again, review the limited service agreement process. Through that process and many presentations to council, I'm not going to elaborate too far into that, but effectively council adopted a new policy, which is the seasonal level of service policy, which we call SLOS. For unassumed roads. That really outlines a level of service that council has chosen to provide on those roads. The roads must meet minimum standards to qualify, so within that seasonal level service policy, there's a definition and requirements for the structure of the road before service can be provided. The service is limited to grading and application of gravel as deemed necessary by the road supervisor. And it's limited to spring, summer, and or fall grading up to twice a year. So that's really the service that's provided through that seasonal level of service policy. Policy is very clear that no winter service or no winter patrol is to be provided on unassumed roads. That being said, there's a recent resolution for staff to review the potential of fee-for-service for 2019, so we'll be reviewing that through the course of this year and bring some additional information back to council for council's consideration. So that's the status of unassumed roads. Moving forward to private roads. Again, same review started with the LSAs. 2017 staff recommended ceasing activity on private roads per the legal recommendation and obligations. Prior council has directed that we're not to add any additional limited service agreements, but to maintain status quo on the current agreements and services being provided under those prior LSAs, the limited service agreements. So those limited service agreements are still in place and being actively maintained. And staff was directed at the time to provide more, or to undertake more review with those associations, which we have done. We've met with multiple associations, reached out to all that had LSAs. Again, the general feedback that we received from those associations, that residents enjoy the services offered by the city and have come to expect them. Again, staff have some concern over the consistency and equal level of service related to that, and has potential impact on of our roads inventory review that I'll get into after this. So if we have any questions on kind of those three categories of roads, let's go through that now, and then I'll talk more about the roads maintenance database.
Okay, Councilor Yeo?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I know before 2003, and the maintenance of roads could be assumed and all this stuff, and that was struck down by changes to the Municipal Act. But if, through this special project we've been doing, the roads inventory, I've had numerous people phone me now and been approached by the city because all of a sudden, their little piece of road they're on is found to be unassumed, where the city has been maintaining it since 2003, right up till today. And these people are being told, as of January next year, you will no longer get snow plowing or anything. But it has been, like, we're just finding this out through our roads inventory study. So my question is, where is the onus on the city to continue that maintenance? To continue that snow plowing on these sections of road that are, quite frankly, municipal roads, but through a legal description found out in our roads inventory study that all of a sudden they're not ours.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if maybe we can talk offline about which roads. So staff right now have been directed maintaining status quo on roads. The only ones that have been directed by council to cease winter control service are roads that were unassumed roads that had a previous LSA that were receiving winter control. So those particular roads were provided notice as directed by council that winter control would be ceasing on unassumed roads. I can tell you that, and I'll talk more about the database review as we go forward, there are a number of roads that are receiving, private roads, unassumed roads, et cetera, that are receiving multiple services. That, again, it's our concern, again, the second last bullet point there is consistency and equal level of service, because there is a variety of everything right now. There's 165 kilometers of unassumed roads in the city. If we start providing, service to one road, winter control, that's a significant expansion of service. That would require the addition of probably 4 or 5 plow trucks and service associated with it. So we want to be sure that when we make these decisions, council's making these decisions with all the knowledge. Staff can do whatever council's directed. We have the capability, we have the knowledge, and we have the resources or we can get the resources needed. But we just want to make sure council's aware of all those decisions before. But if there are specific roads that have come to saying we've been told we're no longer getting service, we can have a discussion afterwards about which ones those are.
Any further questions? Seeing none, go ahead.
Okay, so that transitions very quickly into the roads inventory review. So similar to intro screen to what Director Rojas and Director Stover were talking about, we have 2,700 centerline kilometers of roads, which equates to roughly 5,400 lane kilometers of roads. And again, those numbers there you've seen multiple times now, approximately 900 kilometers of each one. I've put a caveat on there that the values are still being verified, and that's because that database is growing. As we continue to undertake our review, we're determining and finding new unassumed roads, we're finding new private roads, we're adding every single road segment into that database so that we have knowledge of what roads there are within the municipality. We're continuing to confirm road status, being unassumed, assumed private or forest roads. One of the big processes that we're undertaking, and we're revisiting that process right now, is to confirm what maintenance services are being provided on those sections of roads. So to us, a road segment is a road from one point to another point. So it's from one intersection to another intersection, or from an intersection to a dead end. That to us is a road segment, and how we're laying out that database. So we have 4,428 road segments in that database right now, and it's continuing to grow. So again, we're trying to confirm our activities, whether we provide summer service, i.e. grading and general activities like that, or whether we're providing winter service or both, or we're, just because we provide summer and winter services doesn't mean that we're fully maintaining that road. There's other aspects like the ditching, drainage programs, brushing, and general other upkeep that are activities under our group. So just to give you a couple of numbers, there's about 1,683 segments assumed by bylaw. We need to go through all 1,683 segments and confirm those bylaws are actually those assumption bylaws, because we've made some assumptions on those bylaws that have been inaccurate in the past and roads haven't been assumed. That doesn't mean that we're going to cease service. We're going to continue service on those roads, but we need to understand the legalities around those roads and the assumption thereof. We have 2,160 require confirmation of ownership because we did provide service prior to 2003. So there may be multiple, well, maybe there are multiple roads that we're already aware of and likely more of that are still privately owned. But we've been treating them as a full municipal right-of-way for years. So we want to try to clean that process up, whether it's obtaining ownership now or putting notice and title about potentially getting that property down the road so it becomes into municipal ownership. There's a lot of things to clean up in the database. Just to give you a little bit of indication, there's about 573 road segments totaling more than 224 kilometers for private, unassumed, and unconfirmed roads. So there's about 225 kilometers of roads out there that there's limited information on. So we're working on that. There's 28 segments that are contained within limited service agreements for private roads. So again, we've been directed to maintain private road LSAs as status quo. There's only 28 segments within those private roads right now. So that gives you the kind of indication of, the economy of scale when you're talking 28 of 537. So as we continue to move forward with that database, again, we're trying to establish current maintenance practices. We're reviewing ownership, reviewing the assumption bylaws. We're probably still looking at a 3 to 4 year window to have that database complete, and that's just based on resource availability. Of course, all this has a cost associated with it. So we've been working very well with Realty Services and the resources there, and talking to Rob about alternatives to continue moving that program forward as well. Just to give you a bit of an indication as well, as we're going through there currently, it talked about the link between the capital asset management plan, the capital plan, and this database. There are 128 private road segments right now that are listed in our current asset management plan. So we either need to go through and assume ownership of those roads and bring them into our database, or try to figure out why those private roads are in our database, because they're in our capital plan. So, and the question is, should they be? Any questions on the inventory before I move forward? Nope. Okay, citywide projects. This is one small division. We have an engineering technician and one summer student, technical student that supports that. Responsible for depot upgrades, sand dome and salt shed upgrades and replacements. The bigger program that they're responsible for is citywide operational projects. We used to have two engineering technician supports. One of them was transferred to engineering. They took with them the capital gravel resurfacing program, the localized resurfacing program that Juan's already spoken about. The rest of the programs were left within our group. So those programs that effectively the one senior engineering technician in the support worked through is the line painting and symbol painting program that happens on an annual basis. Our ditching program, a citywide ditching program, guide rail replacement program, dust control, roadside grass cutting, sweeping, bridge maintenance, storm sewer flushing. So this is one staff member coordinating all these activities for the entire city. So it's a large program. Some of the more crucial aspects of maintaining the road and the road structure, as Juan was talking about with the ditching program, the dust control, council's aware we've significantly increased the amount of calcium chloride applied to roads to control dust and really help bind and build the integrity of our gravel roads. Those programs are coordinated through that citywide area. Any questions on that before I move forward? No? Okay, we'll move into what the roads operations frontline staff do on an annual basis. So again, we grade roads and shoulders, clean bridges, maintain bridges, expansion joints and so on. We patch potholes, which we'll talk more about in coming forward. Repair ditches and drainage. We repair and replace culverts, guideposts, signs, streetlights, traffic, signals. We do roadside grass cutting, noxious weed program, road patrol. Again, we talked about dust control, brushing, ditching programs, line painting, sidewalk repair, gravel replacement, entrance permits. These are all, I can keep going, but these are all programs that we deliver on a daily or annual basis within our operational group. The last one again is the newest kind of support that we provide is customer service, and I'll speak more about that as we move forward. So specifically pothole patching. So a pothole is a type of failure in a road surface. It's caused by the presence of water in the underlying soil structure. So as Director Rojas is talking about, drainage is crucial for roads. We need the water draining out of the road subbase in order to maintain the integrity and strength of that road. As the subsurface becomes saturated, either by the inability to drain or by other materials plugging that. If we have cracks in the road, water getting down into that structure localized will then freeze, raise the road, and then degrade and break down that road structure. So as that freeze-thaw cycle happens and traffic and other activities happen over top, the road structure is broken away and you have a pothole. Climate change is a significant factor to that from our group, as Deputy Mayor Elmsley mentioned, that the increase in freeze-thaw cycles is accelerating deterioration of our roads. We are going to see a very impacted spring this year on a lot of our high-float roads. As Juan was mentioning, the average life expectancy for a high-float road is anywhere from 10 to 12 years, sometimes less. We have many roads out there that are pushing 15, 20 years, and those roads over the course of this winter are seeing a lot of damage. Prevention, again, drainage improvement. So our ditching program, our brushing program are two key components of facilitating drainage for roads. Preventative maintenance, the life cycle extension program coordinated through capital projects, looks at route sealing a lot of those roads to prevent the water from getting into the subbase through the road surface. Utility cut management is a piece that is coordinated through our group to manage and make sure that those utility cuts are repaired in an appropriate manner. Within Public Works, we do temporary coal patching. Temporary coal patching is a necessary evil. We'll never get away from temporary coal patching. We are looking at alternatives, though. We have semi-permanent repairs. We now have 3 hot boxes, and what they are effectively is heated trailers to store hot mix asphalt, which is the same surface asphalt that you see on a regular road, and we can patch holes with that hot mix asphalt. We're seeing life cycle of those patches last longer, but they are still a patch. And there's another product that we're piloting right now as well called from Daily. It's called Instarmac. It is a cold in place. They're calling it a permanent patch repair, and we're seeing not a permanent, but we're seeing significant life cycle extension. So if anybody drives across the Queen Street Bridge over the river, we patched that bridge with that product almost 2 years ago now, and we're just starting to see some of those patches start come out now, versus the cold patch repairs are pretty well, every couple of weeks you see those start to blow out. So we're seeing success with that. That product is 11 times the cost of cold patch. But if we're seeing that level of success, we're going to continue to expand the use of it. So that is something that we're working on as well. And again, the last piece of prevention really is replacement. So again, capital programs for localized resurfacing, urban and arterial resurfacing, and the rural resurfacing program. So those are the ways that we can continue to manage and mitigate pothole patching or potholes. I want to talk about minimum maintenance standards related to pothole patching. So we frequently get calls from the public saying there's a pothole in this road and they'll call back in the afternoon and say, you haven't fixed the pothole yet, what's going on? Our operations, again, everybody that we have is generally deployed to patching if we need that. If we're doing winter response, there is nobody available to pothole patch. We have 61 routes, 65 drivers. There's effectively everybody that's assigned to a truck is in a truck. So there's a limit to that. The piece that layers on top of that now is minimum maintenance standards and requirements. So again, as we talked about before, class 1 through class 5 roads, class 6 roads are outside of the requirements for minimum maintenance standards. These are response times. So I have some show and tell with me. So just to give council and public a bit of an idea, a class 2 road. So this is our Road 121s, Kent Street, Lindsay Street South, Little Britain Road are all kind of class 2 roads. We have, this is a pothole, this size, this depth, this size, this area would classify as a pothole on the road. We typically on a class 2 road have 4 days. That's not identified through that. Oh. Sorry, the tables, so it's 7 days actually. This is old information. So
4 days is good.
yeah. MMS requires 7-day response. So once a pothole is reported through our customer service center, it's logged into our system. That information is sent through to our supervisor. They then coordinate response to that activity. For a pothole on a class 2 road of this size is a 7-day response. So if we have a similar size pothole to this, and then moving up to class 3, 4, 5 roads, again, you're up to 14, 30 days, and even 60-day response required under minimum maintenance standards. So that's the piece that you need to consider. As we move into some of the lesser roads, class 3 highway, let me move forward here as well. So these are so this is on the surface. So if we get back into hard surface roads, these are effectively class 3 highway. This is a 1,500 centimeter square pothole that's 8 centimeters deep. This is the kind of surface area that you're looking at, right? So class 3, 4, 5 roads, 10 centimeters, 30 days, upwards of 60 days. We're frequently achieving a level of service that's far greater than that. We're responding and providing repairs in a more frequent, a higher level of service. Yes, again, a pothole patch is a temporary response. So we provide that response. It may last a week, it may last 2 weeks, it may last a month. And then as that pothole then regenerates, our response time requires us to go back out and re-respond to that event. So challenge is you know, the level of service and the expectations and the minimum maintenance standards don't always align. So we do the best we can with the resources that we have to achieve those. As we start to use some of these more permanent products like the hot patch, the hot mix asphalt and the permanent cold mix, we're hoping to see some of those the cycles of those holes reappear, start to decline as time progresses. So it is a challenge. It's an ongoing. It's never going to go away. As Director Stover mentioned, City of Toronto repaired somewhere upwards of 200,000 potholes. We're definitely not near that level, but we have a significant amount of response required, and it will be an ongoing activity.
So I have a quick question there, if I can. Maybe just when you talked about the different ways, you talked about the cold patch, hot box, and the new material that seems to be lasting longer. So in the winter time, we can't use hot box, correct? Because the asphalt plants are closed? Because I get a lot of people that think, you know, we should be out with our hot box in the winter filling these holes more permanently. So can you just clarify that asphalt, we're fairly limited in the winter, what we can do with a pothole?
Absolutely. So again, the ideal situation is a dry, warm day to pothole patch. So you can get in and the material can adhere to the hole and it'll hold in properly. A lot of times in the winter, holes are partially filled with ice. We have, again, an obligation under the minimum maintenance standards to provide or to take care of that road discontinuity. So we fill it with patch or whatever we want. The difference being, between hot mix asphalt, which is again your typical road resurfacing product, versus cold patch, for starters, hot mix asphalt is only available through the paving season. It's available effectively from May till October, sometimes if we're lucky into November. That's when the product is available for us. We use the hot boxes year-round though. In the summer, we use them primarily for hot mix asphalt and repairs. In the winter, we use those hot boxes for cold patch. So we'll put the cold patch in there so we are there keeping the product malleable and easier to work with rather than having a frozen block of cold patch. So we do use the boxes year-round. The product we put in those boxes will vary depending on the season. But again, some of the other products that we're piloting, they're year-round products. So.
Okay, so just as a follow-up, so when you talked about the weather is a popular conversation, change in the climate is taking its toll on our roads. So Director Rojas talked about the life cycle of roads. Are we looking long-term at adjusting the life cycle? I mean, we know this is happening. We understand, I'm not sure we understand why it's happening, but it's happening. The climate's changing according to our healthy environment plan we're going to see this afternoon. It's not going away anytime soon. So what adjustments are we making to our roads to not just fix more potholes, but what long-term adjustments are we looking at so that as this changes, how are we changing to more accommodate it? I don't know if that's more a question for you or I let Juan off the hook.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So again, operationally, we are responding and looking at different ways to maintain roads. As far as the design of the roads and the asphalt they're using, Director Rojas talked a little bit about different mix designs that provides better flexibility and better ways to handle those type of freeze-thaw type situations. From a pure public works operational perspective, again, there's not a lot we can do from that looking forward perspective other than to look at new technologies and new ways. There are completely self-contained trucks and units that fix potholes remotely. So the operator can sit in a cab, drive along, it'll have an internally heated hot box. He can clean out a hole, blast it out, fill it, and compact it from the seat of a truck. Those units are incredibly expensive, but we can look at alternatives like that. We can look at the daily products. There's new products coming out on the market that are placed in the hole and melted in with a torch to seal. So we're looking at alternatives. That's operationally all that we can do is to manage the holes as they come forward. As Director Rojas talked about, the way to prevent the holes from an operational perspective is the ditching and brushing programs. So again, we've been expanding those ditching programs, expanding those brushing programs. We're going to continue to work on those. Right now, a lot of our program aligns strictly with the capital program. So we try to get in a ditch, brush those programs, replace culverts ahead of the resurfacing program. We need to continue to focus on our operationals. As mentioned, a lot of the roads haven't been ditched for 10, 15, 20 years. So we need to go back in and reestablish those ditches. It's not always a favorable activity for the residents. Residents don't like seeing ditches in front of their property. They don't like seeing activity removing trees, removing brush in the road allowance. So those are all things that we have to continue to balance as we move forward to deliver that program.
Thank you. Councilor Riley?
Yeah, just a quick one to you, Brian. Are some municipalities actually, like certain services we contract out, like sealing, and I understand are some municipalities actually contracting out pothole? I realize we have a budget that we have to follow, but are our municipalities that are actually contracting pothole replacements?
Through you to the Mayor, we have limited resources as well that we contract out. We do the bulk of the work in-house, but we do have contracted services to do pothole patching for us. Again, it's really a balance and maintenance on, and where we drive our level of service is the minimum maintenance standard. So we can provide a far enhanced level of service, but it's going to cost the municipality more. Or we can achieve the minimum maintenance standards, which is effectively the provincial average, the provincial standard, and we can deliver that level of service. That's where we're at right now. You're welcome.
Go ahead. Thank you.
So the next one is really along the same thing of pothole patching. This is the table that really talks about paved service roadways. For gravel surface is very similar. Again, for that large sized patch, the 1,500 centimeter square patch of a depth of 8 centimeters, we have 7 days to respond. We have 14 days. We have 30 days to respond. So for gravel roads, it's far more difficult to manage potholes. That's because of, well, in this shoulder season we're in right now, as we come out of winter into the spring, potholes develop very, very quickly. The road's partially frozen, the road's base is certainly saturated. If we go out and grade a road in that condition as it sits there right now, that road will turn to mush. It will turn to mud and will be destroyed. So although residents are, have concern and legitimate concern over potholes on those roads, we don't have the ability to touch those roads until conditions are conducive to touch them. We have, and that would be, applying that road with a grader. So we have, in cases past, applied some gravel to roads and brushed it over the top to fill potholes to gap us through until we can grade them. Each depot now has its own drag. That's a piece of equipment that is pulled behind equipment that doesn't do a full depth of grading, but effectively scratches the surface to help fill potholes temporarily to gap us through until we can properly grade the road. But that's definitely a challenge for us because a lot of the time our staff are equally frustrated over the condition of the roads, but we just simply don't have the capability to respond without making the situation much worse than it already is. So again, response times are there, 7 days, 14 days, up to 30 days to respond to potholes per minimum maintenance standards. Getting on to some of the other activities that we perform, again, road and shoulder grading, we talked a bit about that just a second ago. Typically we will grade loose top or gravel top roads 3 to 5 times a year, more if needed. We try to tackle shoulders 3 to 4 times annually. Again, cause and effect of potholes and gravel roads is similar to asphalt roads. It's that moisture in the subsurface and the flexing of that road and then the traffic moving over top that causes the material to blow away and the pothole to form. We try to grade our roads at 4 to 6% crossfall, shoulders at 6% crossfall. That is to allow the water to shed away from the road, from the surface, and not sit on the road and penetrate in. And then again, our calcium chloride program that we've recently expanded to help bind the road together and create a seal on that road surface. Roadside brushing, again, talked a bit about that already as well. We do coordinate a lot of that roadside brushing program with the capital project. Again, I'll try to get through, I think, the rest of this. I'm not sure where we are in timing. We're fine for timing? Okay, it allows us to, it supports multiple programs as well as we remove vegetation from the road allowance, allows proper drainage in the road. It allows the sun to get to the road surface. There's many back roads where we have vegetation right at the edge of the road. Those roads typically stay iced longer, they stay frozen longer, and it impacts the roads. So if we get the sun down to the road surface, it helps us out to melt off ice and snow on the roadways as well. So we do that, complete that service with city and contracted services is a blend of that that's coordinated by supervisors and the senior engineering technician. To move forward, talk a bit about drainage. I won't get too far in depth here. This is a very similar cross section that was shown by Director Rojas about the gravel road, the structure, and then the ditching on the other side of the road. Not only our standards, but these are Ontario provincial standards that help show that required structure for the road. Again, we have a budget for this within our operations group. The entire budget is not spent within our typical operations. We do coordinate a lot of activity, again, ahead of the capital program. And we try to stay about a year ahead of that program. So we're now brushing and ditching roads that are in the 2020 capital plan. Winter maintenance is always a fun topic to talk about as well. Winter maintenance, we are again governed by our minimum maintenance standards. We're governed by the CKL level of service council policy that's been adopted. And we are governed by our own operations and maintenance guidelines. So from November 1st to April 15th, road employees patrol sand, salt roads, sidewalks, and parking lots, cleared usually about 6 to 8 hours after an event happens, depending on the length and severity of that event. Those are our kind of commitments and typical guidelines when we're talking and actually relate back to our level of service document. Winter maintenance, so again, a big factor for us is equipment readiness, housekeeping, best practices, response to events. So we have, again, 61 internal plow routes, we have 60, I think we have 6 spares right now, I'm looking back, 6 spares. So we have 67 trucks that are maintained in-house and through contracted services, but coordinated through our fleet services department. And the other piece that we have here is a salt management plan. So the city has adopted a salt management plan that provides guidance on how we provide salt. One of the key factors we hear is that, you know, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to get out, my road hasn't been touched yet. We have routes, again, that take 6 to 8 hours to complete. Typically in the winter, if it's a significant event, we will deploy resources at 4 a.m. So that means half the roads are touched before 8, half the roads are touched after 8. So there's always someone has to be first and someone has to be last, unless we want to significantly change how we structure and deliver our level of service, which is always a resource impact. We get into winter patrol. So these come back to minimum maintenance standards. Patrol is a legislated requirement under that minimum maintenance standard. So we patrol our roads in the winter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through that window. We have, this year's been a challenge to get enough crew leads, but so we're only running 2 patrol areas right now. In the future and moving forward, we'll have 3 patrol areas. We're gonna have a northeast and west patrol area. Again, patrolled 24/7, 365. So they are documenting winter conditions. They're documenting any deficiencies in that service. They are calling out, deploying resources as needed, calling off those resources as needed. They're keeping a full journal of everything that's happening through that time period so that we are covered under minimum maintenance standards from a liability perspective. So they've been, those patrol are actually our crew lead positions, but they're providing the service of winter patrol. So they are, again, new positions that were created that have a heightened level of accountability and responsibility with respect to minimum maintenance standards. Again, total plow routes is 71. We do 61 in-house. We have 10 arterial contracted routes that council awarded to Todd Brothers in a tender last year for 10 years. So we're secured for a 10-year period to have those routes covered through contract. We do also have 6 secondary routes where there's smaller specialized equipment is necessary for some of our non-standard back roads and smaller residential and or cottage areas. Again, every employee is assigned to a route, so there's really no redundancy built into our operational model. This year we've had a challenge with staffing as most years in the past, so we've been forced to contract out 2 additional routes. Again, pull some of the crew leads that would have been normally in the crew lead and patrol and put them in trucks this year. So we've had to really compromise where we want from a minimum maintenance standards and level of service to deliver the services to the residents this year. Getting into materials. Really, the city uses sand and salt. And salt, want to be very clear, salt is only used on asphalt roads. Salt is not used on surface treated roads. Salt is not used on gravel roads. Primary reason for those is salt will damage. Salt is, it lowers the melting temperature and it softens the road surface. So if you put salt on a gravel road, it will turn the surface of the road to mud, to mush, and it will damage the surface of that road. So salt is only used in area and temperatures of 12 degrees and rising. If it's minus 12. If it's below minus 12, salt doesn't do anything. So we, unless the forecast says that it's going to come up, we won't use salt. We will use sand on roads to manage that through. Salt application rates and sand application rates are defined within our salt management plan and our level of service documents. Any questions on that before I move forward? Last piece here, a couple last pieces, I guess, for winter events. So staff record events for maintenance tracking. We've had a lot of discussion over years past here about a winter event. How much does a winter event cost? It's very, very difficult for staff to tell you how much a winter event costs on a regular basis. We've done a couple average events. We've pulled out a couple isolated incidents. The average call is about $125. So if we $125,000. So if we have no snow, we get 8 to 10 centimeters of snow overnight. The snow stops. We do one round of service, call everybody back in. It's about $125,000. Our budget allows for approximately 50 average events within the municipality. I can tell you that events, as they stand, can range anywhere from 50,000, maybe even slightly less, to over $500,000. And that is based on a number of things. So if you look at the factors at the bottom of the slide there, as the duration of event, the type of precipitation, freezing rain versus snow, the future temperature, the current temperature of the road, volume of precipitation, the event time and day. So on weekends is obviously a premium cost to us. Events happening in the evening, again, overtime costs related to it. Wind this year has been a huge factor for us. So as wind events and gusting snow and blowing snow requires response to those events. As a reminder, everybody here last year went through that significant event in April of last year. It was a 4-day long freezing rain, blowing snow, everything event. Happened through Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Started Friday night. That one event cost the municipality about $420,000 in response only. So that doesn't factor in the cost of our management, our supervisors, and other events. So it's that one event is a huge hit to the municipality. As long as you promise. This gives you a bit of a financial. I wasn't going to do financial slides, but I think this one here is beneficial for council and the public to understand. Winter control costs. Again, City of Kawartha Lakes, 5,400 lane kilometers of roads, population of 75,000, and that's all based on 2016 data for population. If you look at 2019 winter control budget for our roads, excluding of sidewalks, we're about $8.1 million. Cost per kilometer is about $1,500. Cost per capita, however, is $108. So again, large costs related to the cost per capita. If you go down the list and compare us against a lot of the other neighboring and kind of comparator municipalities, where you'll see is that our cost per kilometer is right in line or low compared to other municipalities. But our cost per capita is very high. And that just kind of comes back to, again, the number of roads and the number of people that we have. If you look at City of Peterborough, for instance, $2.7 million winter budget, but they only have 960 kilometers of roads, which means that their cost per kilometer is $2,800, but their cost per capita is only $33. So this is the challenge that our municipality has. If you go to Greater Sudbury, for instance, they have more roads than us, but their budget's $18.5 million versus our $8 million. So they have much more severe winters out there and more accumulation, which makes sense. But those are the kind of challenges we have. I hear all the time, as I travel to Durham region, the roads are fantastic, so City of Kawartha Lakes doesn't know what they're doing. This is a very frequent comment that I hear. If you look at their costs, again, 2377 lane kilometers of roads. Population, though, 645,000 people in Durham region, $10 million winter budget. Their cost per kilometer is $4,213. If you wanted to relate that same cost per kilometer to our roads, our budget's going to be $25–30 million. So it's that's the level of service difference. We can achieve that level of service if council wants to get there, but getting there is going to be incredibly costly to the residents. So we're doing the best we can to manage the resources and the funding that we have and deliver a service that, in my opinion, is still quite acceptable to the residents. The last one for everybody here is our roads case management. So I want to touch briefly on that because it is a change to the department. Again, we have 2 new dedicated staff members, new last year to the department. They're service information specialists. They handle all roads cases for our department. So as residents submit an issue through Report It Now on the website, or whether they call it in through the customer service center and they get to our roads call queue, they're logged into case through JDE, and our staff manage that and work with the supervisors. So they're actively working with the supervisors on emergency requests and or regular day-to-day requests to update the database and make sure the information is there, and then close out those cases. So it's functioning very, very well right now. I got a call the other day in the morning. Was left on my voicemail. By the time I got to check it later in the day, the case had already been entered, reviewed, and closed. So by the time I got to the system, the case was already completed. It was fantastic. So again, we're working on that. So just to give you a kind of economy of scale, in 2018, we received 5,117 road cases that were implemented, reviewed, monitored, and the bulk of closed out. So that is the general operations for Public Works. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Director? Oh. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 3 questions, please. I'll make them quick. The first one is through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director, the pothole patching, and when there are concerns, or nice word for complaints, I guess, when people see the work that's done. For example, even in a perfect summer day, I'll give you an example, Shamrock Road, Kennedy Bay Road, just in my ward, like there's just a maze of bumps. They're not smooth. Like, is there going to be an effort to, once they're placed into the hole, that they're tampered level, or at least have a bit of a crown on it, but not that much of a crown where they're still bumpy when people run over them, drive over them? That's the main complaint, I guess.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a standard operating procedure for the placement of potholes or for filling and placement of patch. That is an ongoing learning process with our staff, and we relate primarily back to the specifications for the placement of that material from the manufacturer. They require compaction. So there's multiple ways to achieve that compaction. One of the most efficient ways provided by the manufacturer is simply to drive over the pothole with a piece of equipment. So we compact it with equipment as opposed to a hand tamper. I know that there's some concern around how we handle that. I received one the other day on Kent Street where our staff were filling potholes and driving away, and not compacting. Well, what they're doing is they're filling those potholes in series and then driving around the block and compacting that with a truck. So they're doing the best they can with the resource they have, recognizing that if we sat there and shoveled out, blew out, filled and compacted every single hole individually, we'd never achieve the requirements to manage those potholes. They are a temporary patch. They're not a permanent repair.
Second question, and I didn't see it mentioned, but it was on haul routes. For example, in near Omimi, like there's dedicated haul routes and there's a lot of quarries. So I'll give you an example, Fox Road, Beaver Road, Esker Road. A lot of these trucks deviate from, like I'm all for getting the product to market, but a lot of these trucks deviate from their specified haul route, and that's really causing a lot of deterioration of the roads. Like, will the haul routes be looked at, or at least make sure that they're properly, monitored? Because right now, a lot of these trucks are not following the proper haul routes, and it's causing a lot of damage and a lot of costly expenses for us.
So again, through you, Mr. Mayor, the haul routes are where there's a lot of quarries that don't have defined haul routes. They don't have approved plans. I understand that entire program is being reviewed in coordination with engineering, realty services, development services, and so on as well. Public Works has limited capability to manage that. What we can do within Public Works is I have the authority to limit activity on roads. I can close roads. I can load restrict roads during certain times of the year. That's obviously has a different political implication of handcuffing or impacting those resources. Really, if trucks are not following designated haul routes under agreement, that's an enforcement issue with police and is really outside of the purview of Public Works.
And just a final question. Our contractors, whether they're large or small, do they adhere to the same specifications and requirements that the city does? And how are they monitored? Like, I get questions like that.
Sorry, in what respect?
Well, say for example, like, are they, like, we have a codes that we have to meet, like requirements, just like what you said up there. So the private contractors, whether they're large or small, there's some big ones, like you mentioned, Todd Brothers, and there's some smaller ones that go to, tight places and cottage areas and whatnot. Everybody has them, but are they all governed under the same rules, like as far as meeting those criteria?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a little bit vague question, but yeah, so contractors that are working on road allowances are obligated to follow the Ministry of Transportation requirements for traffic control, for safety, whether it's the Occupational Health and Safety Act for work in working at heights or working in trenches and so on. They're all under the same requirements. Whether they're following the same specifications that our staff are required to follow really depends on the individual contract. So I know that when we hire work out through capital projects, they're following the same specifications that our staff would follow for work that is being provided.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm wondering if first, just for some of the new councillors and the public, if you wouldn't mind just introducing, you've got quite a few of your staff here. Would you mind just, some of us don't get around all areas of the city, so there's some not so familiar faces. So would you take a minute and introduce them?
Absolutely, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd love to. Everybody can stand as I go through if they want. So with our Fleet Services Division, Todd Bryant is the manager of Fleet and Transit. I don't know if we want to introduce, Brenda doesn't want to be introduced. Dave McPherson, he is the new manager for the East area, replacing David Brumwell.
Thanks for wearing a tie, David.
Someone had to. David Brumwell has announced retirement at the end of this month, so we are lucky enough, fortunate enough to have a bit of an overlap in that, and lucky enough for me, I replaced a Dave with a Dave, so it's very easy. Next body is David Lemke. David Lemke is the new manager for West. Keep going down the line. Rob Peel is a supervisor in Oakwood, soon to be shifting locations to be determined. Karen Pride is the supervisor for Cobeconk. We have Bruce Kitching, who is the supervisor for Lindsay area. Oliver Vigalius is the manager for, I guess technically West B, but he's the manager that oversees capital projects, special projects in Lindsay. And Shelley Durham is the executive assistant to the Public Works supporting department. I think that's the group. Oh, there's more upstairs.
Someone else up there?
I can't see.
Oh, over here.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thank you all for what you do. I know our roads are a challenge, and we have a lot of them, and it's nice to put a name to a face sometimes, so appreciate you being here. A couple of hypothetical questions for you, which, careful how you answer because your staff are here. If you could have one thing to improve the maintenance of our roads in an unlimited budget request, what would it be for summertime to improve the maintenance of our roads? What was be the first thing that would come to mind?
Well, again, I think this touches base back on what Director Rojas is talking about and over life cycle of our roads. We have a lot of roads that are approaching end of life cycle, and they are a challenge to maintain. So whether it be gravel roads and trying to accelerate that capital program to get the level of road condition there, or whether it be our own operational budget to get ahead of a lot of the ditching and brushing that has been delinquent for years, those I think are the biggest challenges to the road condition and the road structure itself. Again, I think we're in the right mindset right now where you can see there's significant additional investment and money's being put towards accelerating those programs. But if we continue to drive down that way, I think we'll continue to see an improvement on our roads.
Okay, and if we switch that to winter time and we wanted to improve our winter maintenance for the citywide, what would be the obvious ask to do that?
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, we're in my mind right now, based on our level of service document, we're structured to achieve that level of service document. It's whatever council wants to see and what the public are demanding. If they want to see roads cleared in 4 hours instead of 8 hours, it means that we're going to need to double the amount of equipment on the road. So again, double the amount of equipment is double the amount of cost. So to me, it's all fluctuated back to cost and level of service. If we want to achieve a higher level of service, staff are prepared and capable of delivering that, but it's going to put an impact on finances.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I don't see any more questions, so we appreciate it. I think we've got one little wrap up from our Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor Elmsley. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Excuse my back. Some people think it's the best part of me, but well, I think now that we're all road scholars, we can move forward. And why am I wrapping this up when we've heard from the experts on the finances, on the how the roads are built and how the roads are maintained, what is my role in this? And I think we'll all go back to our election campaigns, and the single thing that we heard from most constituents on all our public meetings was roads, roads, roads. What are we doing about potholes? What are we doing about maintaining our roads, fixing our roads? And I think that the mayor talked about in his campaign that we were going to go out and engage the public ward by ward. And of course, he will do his public meetings. And in conjunction with that, it's the new role of deputy mayor. He's asked me to take on these roundtables within the communities, within each of our wards, and working with you folks in each of those wards will put these together, these roundtables together, and as you can read as well as I can, they'll be topic focused, and the topic this year will be managing our roads. Next year it will be something else, or maybe even two topics, but I think because of the focus on roads this year and the number of times we heard it at public meetings and during the election campaign, I think it suits us to try and get a handle on this. And, you know, all of us are smarter than some of us or one of us. And I think by engaging the community, we have a lot of really clever, smart folks out there who have a lot of experience. And by bringing them on board in this roundtable type of environment, we'll see what kinds of ideas we get and see what kinds of things come out of it that can help us to go forward. And if nothing else, we at least engage the people in the communities to know what we're faced with and what we're up against and how we want to go forward. And if we get that understanding, then I think that it will make all of our jobs easier and a better understanding of what we're faced with. So you'll hear more about this afternoon when we do our roundtable at the end of our committee of the whole. I have some thoughts on how we go forward with this and how we should set it up so that next year when there's a different deputy mayor, that person can continue on. But I'll certainly be looking for all of your cooperation in order to get this off the ground and moving forward. So we're going to be looking at keeping our good roads good and making our poor roads better, determining affordability, sustainability within the investment threshold, and talking about how weather patterns and things that are going on, how our roads are used, what we need to do to change or modify or fix, and work with Public Works, engineering, and all of our staff to be successful and to try and get a handle on this issue. So thanks for listening to me, and I'll talk to you more this afternoon at the end of our session. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So are there any final questions regarding roads 101 for any staff? I need a motion then to receive the presentation today, please. Councillor Dunn, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. All in favor? That's passed. Item 6.1 is a report we have for the cost analysis for paving Zion Road. This came forward before, and it was referred to this meeting for staff to come back with a bit of a report and an analysis. I need a motion that report be received. Councillor Vail, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? Is there any follow-up or questions that you had, Councillor Vail? You asked that this be brought forward, so.
Just some questions based on the report that went forward. So first off, I guess my first question is when we look at Adam's report in the appendix of the cost-benefit analysis between paving and remaining gravel, the one thing that jumps out at me is the other maintenance. What is under other maintenance that we are doing that it costs exactly the same or almost exactly the same to maintain a gravel road over 15 years and maintain a paved road over 15 years.
Director?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So again, this is a rural cross-section. So maintenance, the majority of the maintenance is ditching and brushing. So whether it's high float or gravel, you still have to ditch and brush and regrade the shoulders, right? So that's the lion's share of the maintenance. Now, there are some maintenance associated with high float, the slurry seal, the fog seal, that's unique to high float. And there's some maintenance related to the gravel road, the regrading and the calcium. But they sort of match each other. So that's why.
Grading and calcium has already been taken into account. It shows in a different column under
Can you use your microphone, please?
The grading and the calcium already shows, is already broken out as part of the maintenance cost of a gravel road in that chart, right? So it's not part of the other maintenance that's in that list. That's what I'm finding confusing. We've got some pretty big numbers listed under other maintenance for both gravel and paved roads. I'm just struggling with what that could be.
I believe, so through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that's the ditching and brushing, but I can verify and get back to you.
Anything further?
So I guess, so Zion Road, regardless of the conversation today, Zion Road is being completely rehabilitated, correct? The base, re-gravelled, spring of this year, hopefully early spring of this year, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. I would caution on the word completely. So the way we identify there's two different ways to identify what the substandard base is, right? One way is to take boreholes every 50 meters or 25 meters and then know for sure. It's very costly and it requires a lot of pre-work. So we're not doing that. The way we're identifying the areas that need repair is through how historically the road has performed. So we're talking with our public works counterparts and seeing where have they had issues with heaving or potholing in the gravel road, and we identify those as base repair. So we're pretty confident by following that strategy, we're gonna capture the majority of the base, but I wouldn't say completely. So that's the strategy to re-ditch, to brush, and to dig up soft spots in the road and fix the granular material.
So has the rehabilitation begun at this point? Is the ditching and everything complete?
So specifically for Zion Road, the plan is to rehab it this year. Again, it's a 3-year phased-in program. After we rehab the base and the ditching, then put in the surface re-gravel section. So that is work to be planned this year. It was identified in the 18 budget, but because we started late, we didn't get to all the roads listed on the 18. That's why it's a 3-year approach for the base, but it is scheduled for early spring this year.
So have we looked at, I guess my main concern, right, is, and it's not just Zion Road, is the maintenance of these gravel roads on a go-forward basis, right? Like, are we leaving these roads too long, right? Like, you look at a lot of these, and Zion Road is the perfect example, right, where there's basically no gravel left on the road, right? So we go out in the spring and the fall and we're grading, but we're grading dirt and clay and have been for a number of years. So are we going to start to make a change in some of these, to either identify and convert these to asphalt or something because it's easier to maintain or it makes more sense to maintain? Or are we going to start reducing the life cycle of these gravel roads so that, that we're applying gravel to them more often, right? The Good Roads conference or whatever, there was a big section on that back in January or whatever, right? And when I read through those documents or whatever, their guideline is 5.7 years for gravel, right? And I think we are way beyond that, correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So you're absolutely correct. I went to the Good Roads. I didn't go to that particular presentation, but I downloaded it. And their life cycle for re-graveling is anywhere between 3.5 to 5 years, between 3 and 5 years. And again, it's what you heard in the presentation. It's a matter of we have a lot of roads and not a lot of population. So in those areas, they can afford to have their life cycle, say 3 to 5 years. So the majority of our gravel roads, we have on a 10-year life cycle, some at 5, some at 7, but the lion's share it's at 10. And that only started about 5 years ago. Prior to 5 years ago, it was a lot longer than 10. So 10 is an improvement. The other major change we did, again, back 4 or 5 years ago, was we used to re-gravel with granular M. And granular M is a more silty, dirty product. It's cheaper, but there's some impurities in the granular M. I believe in 2013, 12, something or somewhere along that lines, we stopped using granular M and went to a granular A. Again, a little bit more expensive, but it helps the life cycle of the road. So that's the balancing act, right? The balancing acts, we could easily change our life cycle from 10 years to 5 years, or from 10 years to 3 years, but that has a significant financial impact. Whether you hard top that road or leave it gravel, you still need to fix the base, right? So hard topping a gravel road with a poor base, you're just throwing your money away because the same potholes are gonna happen.
No, and I appreciate that, and I get that these bases have to be fixed and correct and brought up, right? I guess it goes back to the same thing. You take into account that the base has to be done. These numbers take into account that the base has to be done, and then you look at ongoing maintenance and even the conversation this morning about the maintenance of these roads. In some of these cases, you know, if we're not putting gravel on them for every 10 years, and I get the before 5 years ago it was a lot worse than that. Like I know that there's roads out there, and I've driven down roads that haven't seen gravel since before amalgamation, right? But I guess the concern is they're only going to continue to deteriorate if we don't start bringing these up. And keeping with the theme of keeping good roads good, would we not be better now to start planning and put a plan in place that, you know, look at either converting to hardtop or putting gravel on every 5 or 6 years rather than 10 years, right? So that the roads that we're fixing the base today never gets to the point that they're at today. You know what I mean?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think the strategy right now is to spend some money on the rehabilitation of the base over the next 3 years. In addition to that, accelerate our ditching program, our brushing program, and I think a couple years ago we increased the amount of calcium we put on the gravel roads, which holds its integrity a little bit better. It does a couple things, dust control, but also helps bind the gravel a little bit better. We are in the process of 2019 to update our long-term financial plan, our 10-year financial plan. We could evaluate what the financial implications would be from a life cycle of 10 years to 5 years or 10 years to 3 years, and then report back on what that would cost for council to at least have that information and move forward on future budgets.
So I would put that in a motion. I think I would like to see those numbers come back as to shortening the life cycle of these roads.
From the gravel roads, 10 years to 5? Is that what you'd like to see, how that rolls out and what the financial implications would be as part of our update to our financial plan? A seconder, Councillor Seymour Fagan? Absolutely, eh? Any questions on that? All in favor? It's a good motion, thank you. Is that your questions? You're good? So just to wrap up on Zion Road real quick, we've got our motion to receive, but the request was from petition to pave Zion Road. Sorry, are you? Yeah, okay, you're listening. So where does it rate, where does Zion Road rate, just so everybody knows, on the scale of AADT? Because we have a level of 400 and above, we pave roads. Under that, we don't. We do them different ways. Where does Zion Road rate in that? It doesn't meet that threshold, obviously, or it would be paved, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. If you look at Table 1, which is page 3 of that report, Table 1 says selected the stats for Zion Road by section, so it's broken up into 6 sections. And again, it's high floated for 400 meters past Simcoe Street at the intersection, and then the rest is gravel road, and then that fifth column is your AEDT. Again, we have the AEDT that was in 2016, and then we applied growth to bring it to 2019. So all the numbers are there. It averages around 145, 150 AEDT. The highest section is 205, and then the lowest section, if we adjust for 2019, the highest section is 214, and the lowest section is 58. So when you blend it together, it's an average of around 150, so it's well below the 400 threshold.
So we've talked about lowering it from 400 to 300. It would include, we would add this many kilometers of roads. If we lowered it to 200, it would be considerably more. But Zion Road doesn't even meet the 200 threshold. If we got down to the 100 threshold, we're almost at the point where we're paving 3/4 of our gravel roads at an excessive cost, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to wrap it up with that. Is there questions? Okay, we have a motion to receive. We're good with that. We have no correspondence, nothing for closed. I need a confirming bylaw for today's proceedings, please. Councillor Dunn, seconded by Councillor Elmsley. All in favor? Passed. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor O'Reilly, Councillor Richardson, all in favor? It's passed. Thank you. We'll see you back here at 1 o'clock.